Welcome back to another episode on the Oak and Rock Fatherhood YouTube channel. I am your host, Zachary Small. I'm joined with co-host Anthony Miglierino. Anthony, what's going on, brother?
What's going on, Zach? How we doing?
Doing well, doing well. About to have the wonderful talk about the talk. Talking about sex, talking about drugs, talking about rock and roll. We're going to talk about it in the literal sense. We're going to talk about it in the figurative sense. These are uncomfortable subjects. But as kids grow, they're going to be exposed to this world. They're not going to be young, running around playing with their Legos and stuffed animals for forever. Eventually, they're going to go to their teenage years, young adulthood, and then full-grown adults. Hitting that age where they're out in the world, they're doing their thing, and they're going to be exposed to these things that aren't so comfortable. As a parent, you don't want to rob your child of their innocence. Talking to them about sex too early, talking about drugs, death, these things in the world that are a little heavy. At the same time, you can't have these kids grow up in a bubble away from them, because when they do enter the world, the reality that we live in, you want them to have some sort of defense and understanding as to what's going on. So we're going to talk about how you went through that, how I went through that, and how other parents can come together and get a little more comfortable and prepared to talk to their children about sex, about drugs, about peer pressure, about death, about gangs and things that are out in the world that might want to take advantage of them. I'm not saying gangs like the Bloods and the Crips, but also just political ideologies, the religious ideologies, these things that can want to suck them in and kind of take hook into their personality. If the kids aren't aware, they're easy targets, and we don't want that to happen. So, Anthony, I'm assuming your kids are adults and in their later teenage years, that you've had to have many of these talks, more so than I. The introduction I've had with my 12 and 9-year-old, they have been uncomfortable, but we've had them, gotten through it. So I was wondering what your experience has been with this.
These are extremely uncomfortable conversations, and I think that's even more proof that we need to do them. Right? We need to have them. I would suggest age appropriate. Start as early as you can. Right? Prevention is key. Right? You definitely do not want your child having to learn about what sex is from his peers. You want to make sure that you've spoken to them, you've had conversations about sex, about drugs, and you don't want the guiding light to be the other kids who are learning from other kids, and have them be trapped in that kind of circle of ignorance and just immaturity. So definitely,
I guess my question immediately is, what age is the right age? You said early enough. I remember speaking with Tanner Guzzi, and they had that talk very early. I just had that talk with my son, and he was 11. So when you say early as possible, what to you in your mind is like that window?
There's definitely, every child is different, but I would say when you're presented with it, right? If you see your kid at any age, if they start asking and they're curious, like, where do babies come from? That's the opening, frustration for any parent, and you have to explain it. It is an uncomfortable conversation, and I've fumbled my words. I felt really weird talking to two teenage daughters and talking to my son about it. But it should be a somewhat normal conversation, right? We should be able to talk to each other about it. So each one of my kids was different spots, right? When they were ready, when they started getting curious, I would dive into it. When they felt comfortable, I didn't want to push it on them and be like, hey, you can get syphilis. And Dad, what's syphilis? I didn't want to go that route. I wanted to make sure that we were talking about things that were actually relevant to their age and their questions and their concerns. So like I said, it being preventative doesn't have to be scary, right? Don't worry so much about how the conversation goes. Just worry about opening that door and letting your kid know that if they have questions, they can come to you. They can, start the conversation. They can be curious, and you're not going to be like, oh no, we don't talk about that, right? That's evil or that's bad. And whether it's sex or drugs, talking about drugs is very difficult, especially in this day and age when there are so many young adults and teenagers addicted. So those are conversations I had to have with my children often. Not so much like don't do drugs, but like, why are people doing drugs? Why are there so many kids avoiding and hiding from pain? And I think at certain levels, maybe 10, 11, 12, 13, in those years, you can start having those conversations about drugs and serious conversations. So your kids have a better understanding of, when they're feeling depressed or they're feeling down, they don't have to turn to a substance to make themselves feel better. And really, everything's just, it's a bridge to solving problems. So the more information you give your kids, you don't want to overload them. Like I said, with me, I tend to, and this is how I speak to my kids about everything that's important, right? I listen more. I let them ask questions, so the conversations go more organic. It's not just me demanding and coming from a place of authority, and because they're going to close up when you do things like that.
It's really interesting how we're talking about the talk, and I had to have a talk last night, but it was my son giving me the talk, and I want to get into that in a second, dude. Oh man, yeah, it's interesting now that I'm kind of looking back on it. But to your point on keeping the door open, I have to share a little story. I literally positioned my son in a way that neither of us could open the door when I had the talk. We were in our U-Haul driving from Rhode Island on our move to North Carolina. I decided that was a good time for us to have it because it was my son and I in the truck, my wife and daughter and the animals were in the Jeep following us, and we had a long drive ahead of us. It turned out to be like 13 hours or something. But in there, the cues were there, like you're saying. He's been reading a lot more books. The books are getting more mature, and I'm sure somewhere in there you're starting to see more things about sex. A lot of the shows, a lot of the movies, there's references to these things. He's no longer watching Thomas the Tank Engine. He's not watching Caillou or Arthur or like these things that were on PBS Kids. He's growing up. He's watching more adult content. He's learning more adult things in novels. I mean, even some of the classics, there's a lot of references to sex. And yeah, there's swears, there's a lot of things going on. There's drugs. And he would always bring things up to me. And I never, ever, ever put an emphasis on him not being allowed to do that. I made sure the emphasis was on, yes, this is good. You can ask me anything. If there's a swear word, show me, share it. Come tell. What does it say? All right. Why did they use that word? And one of the things I stressed to him is that these books, these movies, they're art and they're depicting real life. I was like, buddy, in the world, you're going to see people who swear, swearing is a thing. You're going to, sex is a thing. And sort of, we never really dove into like, but what is that? And then on that car ride, I was like, all right, hey, bud, you asked me a few times, like, let's break this down. And I explained to him what sex was and then a lot that came with it. And he was like, oh, and he would sit there quiet, like, and then he'd slowly, well, what about this? And then I would explain. And then, he would take a minute and I'm like, man, this is everything in me was like, just shut up, Zach. Like, just stop talking. This is enough. But then he started asking questions and prying. And I was like, oh, man. So then I think the awareness came of like where he came from. And he was like, oh, okay. So you guys do that? It was super uncomfortable, but we did it and it was open. But to the talk that he had with me last night, he sort of gave the final judgment or the final call that he doesn't want to go trick-or-treating anymore. He's at the age where he wants to go and hang out with friends. He doesn't want a bag. He doesn't want to dress up, to run around house to house. He kind of wants to do his thing and hang out with friends. And I was like, man, I told him, I'm like, I'm glad you brought this up, bud, because I don't know when to do this with you. You're my oldest child. I don't know when you're done with believing in certain things. I don't know when you're done, wanting to go and do these little traditions that you see a lot of kids doing, and so I let him know very clearly, don't ever think you're disappointing me by giving up a tradition that we had been doing when you were a kid. Don't ever think that somehow you're letting me down or anything like that. I wanted to remove that burden from his soul, being preventative with it, like you're saying with the talks, being preventative before they're facing it. I wanted him to know you're growing up and you want to do your thing. And I don't control you. I don't have power over you wanting to continue to do this thing. You tell me, you let me. And he had the talk with me. And I'm sure that was uncomfortable. I mean, it was uncomfortable enough to where it was him and I in the basement because he went down there. He wanted to go work out. I'm like, we just went trick-or-treating. Why do you want to go work out? Like, I like the motivation, kid, but like, what are we doing here? And obviously I could tell like, all right, something's up, and he I followed. I think that was the plan, is he wanted to talk to me down there in private. And so we had that conversation and I was like, wow, this is interesting, given what you were just saying, how it just had to be had. It just had to be said. You just have to discuss the thing. And it's uncomfortable. And You don't really know how it's going to turn out, but as long as you're both fighting for the same thing, which is connection, optimization of self, living your best life and following what you believe to be true, then it can't be wrong. And so talking to your children, like I was saying, it was the books, it was the movies, it was these things that were giving him hints. So I wanted to get ahead of that. Now you know what it is these books are talking about. Now you know what it is these stories and these movies are referencing. Now you know what that word means, and now you're a little more prepared. And as he gets older, and if he's aware of girls, it's not really dating's not a thing. I mean, he's 12. They're not at that level yet. So that's not a thing. But when that becomes a thing, we'll start talking like, all right, what does this play in a relationship? What does sex mean for boyfriend, girlfriend, for husband, wife? Like, what's the next level of what sex is, as opposed to the literal definition, which is kind of what he knows right now. So to your point, I mean, it's spot on. And again, he was 11. I mean, he's 12 now. There's no real set age, but that's how it worked for me. And I haven't had the talk with Ava, my daughter, and she's 9. So we haven't hit the point where she's been exposed to it for me to have to address it. So it's a dance you do. And with each kid, it'll be different.
Yeah, definitely. It makes me think about situations with actually all 3 of my kids, and having them or giving them the ability to speak up and be able to be comfortable speaking with you. And that's why when difficult things show up, we have to keep our emotions in check, right? We can't make the situation heightened. We have to show them the example that, okay, we can have this tough talk, because that's what we're going to see later on from them. And with my 3 kids, I'll give you one example. I got them all into the gym lifting weights. And as they progressed, there came a point in time where they were like, Dad, I don't want to work out with you. I'm good on my own. And at first I was taken back. I was like, man, I trained them. I showed them the way. I built up confidence. We had, rides to the gym, and I was like, yeah, you gotta, lift more. You gotta correct form and stay focused. And now they're like, we don't need you anymore. Thanks. So it kind of took a shot, right? It hit me in the heart a little. And it's emotion, it's mindset, it's perspective. I had to see it as, wow, this is great, right? They're growing. They don't need me. They're going to be doing their own thing. And then I saw each of them teach each other, right? And show each other. And now they talk to other kids, and they're motivating the, other friends and people that they know that they're meeting in the town. So it's really cool to see. And in that moment, you don't really understand what's going on, or you try not to understand because you feel like you're being left out. But it's kind of like raising your birds in the nest, and they have to be pushed out. They have to go on their own. But I will say that, going back to the emotion thing, we get this, and I see this so many times, that when kids do share something with their parents, and especially the father, you get full of rage and anger. And to me, this is critical, because when your kids are out, when they're teenagers, they get older, and they're drinking alcohol, and if they're in a bad spot, if their friends are drinking and somebody has to drive home, you don't want them thinking, you know what, I can't call my parents. I can't talk to Dad right now because he's going to get angry. He's going to get upset at me. And a lot of guys, they don't make this distinction that it's not about that they did something bad or wrong that you disapprove of. It's about getting them home safe. It's about having their life spared and not making a bad decision. The next morning, you can talk about what happened, what transpired, or you can have those uncomfortable conversations. And I tried to never do it from a place of authority, right? And the next morning, wake up and see what you did. How could you do that? You disappointed me. That's not something that I want to convey in my conversation with my kids. I want them to be able to say, hey, Dad, I had too much to drink, or, my friend had too much and I didn't know how to get home, and that's why I reached out to you. Perfect. Fine. Right. I want that honesty. I want that trust. Same thing with sex. I have a 15-year-old son. I don't talk to him and say, hey, go smash as many girls as you can. That's not the conversations we have. I tell him, you have to be connected to another human being. It's important to be intimate, to have a relationship, to build trust with other people. So if you're ready to have sex, make sure you're finding somebody that you're connected with, that you're it might sound cheesy, but I don't want him to go after the instant gratification, and I don't want that to be his mindset. I want him to really and fully embrace all the good things in life. And sex is one of those, right? It shouldn't be seen as a bad, and it shouldn't be seen as just something to get an instant dopamine hit.
You brought up a great point with controlling the emotions in that. It is more than just the surface level. Like you want a deeper connection. You want your child to have a deeper connection in life, not just the instant gratification. Well, the same is said with the connection you have with your kids, especially with these discussions. So if we're going to talk about surface level, you can't have that knee-jerk reaction. You want your child to have a deeper impact and deeper understanding and appreciation for life. You too have to respond that way. So when we talk about if you smell pot in your kid and the first thing you do is run up, grab him by the collar, slam him against the wall, and you smell like your pot. Are you high? What are you doing? Are you friends? Like, and you just lay into him. That's going to scare the shit out of them. It's also going to show you're an emotional disaster if you can be set off that easy. The same thing, we see the dad sitting on the shotgun cleaning or sitting on the porch cleaning their shotgun, waiting for their daughter to get home with their date or whatever. Are you a true leader if you're going to sit there and shoot a teenager for dating your daughter? Are you going to shoot a kid who wants to court your daughter because she's of dating age, and she wants to go out with somebody and you're not ready as a dad? You're not ready for your babies to go into the world? Doesn't that come across as insecure? Doesn't that come across more as you didn't put in the work with your kid, so you've got to put on an exterior front because what happened in the home isn't good enough, so you've got to sit outside the home with an armed weapon at a teenage boy to show him what right looks like? It's absolutely ridiculous. If your kid comes home high or your daughter starts dating, you should have had the conversations with your daughter so she knows what to do. She knows what to look for. She knows the right type of people to bring into her life. With your son, the same thing. It's always daughters, though. Oh, my little girl. You don't have mom sitting on the porch with a Glock in her hand or an AR at some girl that comes in the house, or sitting there with some arsenic poisoning to put in her food, which is not good to her little boy. That's not a thing that happens. It's always dads and daughters. I get it. I have a daughter. There's always that special connection, but I have a special connection with my son too. But if I do the work in the home, I would rather they bring that boyfriend into the house. They bring that girlfriend into the house. Meet my father. Dad, here's a dude or dad, here's the girl that checked all those boxes that we had spoken about you want to look for in a person. So the same thing with that. That's obviously the sex side of the house. With the drugs, if the first thing you do is if you think you smell pot is run out there and rip their car apart and who you with and I'm going to call their parents, they'll never call you if they're in trouble. They will never turn to you because you snapped when you thought you smelt something. You freaked the fuck out when you thought something was going on. Why would they call you? If they're out with friends and they're like, man, I don't like the vibe I'm getting. I want to go home. But I've got to stay with this group because I can't go home. Because I do smell like pot. Because I did, have a few drinks and they're going to smell to my breath. Whatever. They're more afraid of your reaction because you flip the fuck out. As opposed to just, hey, I'd rather my dad have to sit me down and have a long talk about putting myself in this crappy situation as opposed to the alternative. And we do ourselves a disservice. We truly do by reacting emotionally to things. Because if we want that for our kids, that deep, intimate, next level connection and experience, we too have to foster an environment that allows that to occur. There was somebody in one of the FOE groups, I don't remember who it was. I would love to give them a shout out right now. But they're talking about when you first plant a seed and you water it, the water drains into the soil and you don't see it. You're like, oh, I'm just wasting water. Nothing's happening. It's not until that plant sprouts and grows that oh, that water was doing something. I was doing those reps I put in. There was an impact. That water did go somewhere. It didn't just disappear. That thing's going to grow. So too is the conversations we're having now. We're watering that plant. It is uncomfortable now. And you might think, well, that talk I had with my son, like, I don't know what that's going to do. We were stuck in a U-Haul going together, but I got it off my chest because it's my hope later on that plant will grow. And when he's in a relationship like that, or he sees something he's not sure about how it's supposed to work, he can come and talk to me. Like, hey, we already had this talk and dad was super comfortable with it. We made it work. We figured it out. As long as that's there, if my son's at a party and he's like, oh, what's a joint? And he takes a puff and he's high. He's like, oh man, like, I don't know about this. He can be like, hey dad, can you come get me? And he knows when he gets in that car, it's not getting into a torture chamber where I'm going to verbally smash him into the dirt until he feels like absolute shit. No. Hey bud. Hey, I'm glad you called me. Let's talk about it. And the question we had spoken on this prior to hitting record. The focus is more What made you want to try it? What was it about it that had you so interested? And okay, that is the greater discussion point than why did you do this? You disappointed me so much. You're like, no, come on, man. He's trying things, especially if we're talking about life lived. This isn't a fairy tale. The lives we show online need to be real. And if you're going to talk about real, you talk about real failures too. Is any man going to throw a stone and smash their kids into the dirt who's not done the same thing themselves? Who am I to lay into my kid about how terrible they are and how bad of a choice it was? I did the same thing across the board, and I want my children to be better than myself. So if I forge a better relationship with them, that'll set them up to have a better experience than I did, because I was hiding it, because I was afraid of what would happen if people found out. I did have to sneak around because I was terrified of what happens if I get caught. Anybody else can catch me. Send me to jail. Don't send me home. I'd do better off there, because I didn't want to disappoint, because I was afraid, because the conversations had me in a position where it was a bigger concern of letting the family down than myself down, or learning anything about why I was doing what I was doing. So that's what I want for my kids. And they're going to experience things. That's life. And that's the point of the talk, is to prepare them for the real world. These things are going to happen. It's why I talk to my kids about my sobriety from the very beginning. It's why we had the talk about sex instead of just ignoring it until he found porn or he found something online or one of his friends brought it up. It's getting ahead of it. It's being preventative. It's being proactive in your child's life instead of reacting to the things they're going to go through.
Yeah, well said, brother. It's tough. It's difficult. It's a challenge every day. I would say, some fathers might say, well, if I don't stay on top of it, right, my kid's going to be out of control. If I'm not hard on them, then they're going to think that doing drugs is okay, or having unprotected sex is okay. But I would say that's backwards thinking, right? It's prevention. We have the conversations, we open up the door to it, and we don't make sure things are closed with the conversations we have. Then your kid will have a better understanding. They'll be better prepared going into situations. Right? They won't go in and some kid's like, hey man, you want to be cool? Smoke this joint with me. He's gonna be like, nah, man, I already had this conversation with dad when I was 5. I know you don't like me, bro. I know you don't care about me. You just want me to do something to be a part of the crowd. And believe it or not, you learn those lessons. The kids learn those lessons. They understand it. The talk doesn't just have to be about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. There's so many layers to this, right? I talk to my daughters now that they're older about relationships and what good relationships look like, right? If you get into a relationship with another with a man or have a boyfriend, you don't want to be manipulated. You don't allow them to use power over you. You don't let them make you feel bad if you don't do something that he wants to do. And going back to your point before, Zach, you can't be a hypocrite. If you've never allowed your kid to express their own needs and preferences, and you've manipulated them and you've coerced them into behaving well so you can have some peace, you can't tell them to not let their boyfriend control them, because it's hypocritical. And then the other thing is you're teaching them how to let others abuse them.
That's all
So
they know.
It's crazy, man, when you see it unfold. So those are uncomfortable conversations, and I have them with my daughters often, right? Every time they meet a new boy, we talk about them. Like you said, they have their boyfriends come and meet me, and there's an intimidation factor, absolutely. But there also has to be an openness with the boyfriends, or with the girlfriends. You have to come in and you have to be able to have the conversation with another young adult that you've never met and you don't know. You can't put up a wall and say, this is how we do things around here, this is how it is, because before you know it, they're going to run away, elope, and be married in Vegas, and you weren't invited to the wedding. It's not the goals we want to have for the future. Always want to keep it open, right? We want to. And an important thing with keeping it open, and I say this often, is you're going to have conflicts, right? You guys are going to butt heads, but it's the conflict resolution. It's how we resolve things that will bring us closer together. Not being emotional, being able to have a conversation, especially conversations that are important, ones that are uncomfortable, right? As men, as fathers, this is what we should be doing. We should be saying, hey, I'm a man, right? I can withstand difficult things. Let me go have a conversation about sex with my kid. What's the worst that could happen? And I've been there. That's why I'm saying it. Like I would have all these things in my head and try to find the perfect words to say, no, you know what? I just got to go do it. Who cares if I sound stupid? If, if it's not the best way to go about it. Sometimes you just have to do hard things and make best with, where you're at. So don't think too often about how you're going to mess it up. Just have the conversation.
Well, we're trying to be uncommon men as well. Are we not? We're trying to be the dad who's better, the man who's better, the father. We're trying to be exceptional fathers. We're trying to be the oak and the rock here. Wow. Let's give that some more emphasis, okay? The oak and the rock aren't slaves to their emotions. Imagine the child who can say, yeah, I went to my dad with this and it didn't even phase him. He took that shit in stride and he was there and stood up and he squared me away on, what it was we were doing. Instead of, yeah, I went home, my dad beat me. He couldn't handle it. My dad could not control himself because I did something wrong. So he just flipped out and started hitting me. It's interesting too. You're talking about the intimidation factor. There's two ways to look at this. There's the fact that when you're a strong man, when you're an exceptional man, let's go all the way, an exceptional father who's not sitting on that porch cleaning his shotgun, and that kid has to come into the house and he sees this man is not like the other men. These other guys are putting on this show. What's up with this dude? He's welcomed me in. His daughter's here. His family's squared away. He's asking me direct questions, looking me in the eyes. He's got a strong physique. He's dressed well. His home is taken care of. I'm in his castle. And when you project that confidence, you're like, look, dude, you are in my kingdom. You are in my world, and this is my family. And there's no flex needing to be had. It's known. It's observed. We say the king is the king when everybody recognizes he's the king. You're not the king when you say it. Other people know it. If you have to tell that kid with the shotgun, I'm in charge, you've already lost your authority. You've already got to rely on a show of force. You've got to rely on this exterior thing. When he comes to your house and sits at your table and you're like, hey, how you doing? Oh, shit. This guy's shoulders are back, eyes are forward, speaking from his chest. That kid's going to understand without you saying a word or no firearm in sight. It's more like what's unknown. It's like Jaws.
Yeah.
You weren't really afraid when the shark bit you. It's when you heard the music and you couldn't see where the shark was. You're like, fuck, it could be anywhere. That's terrifying. Like, you don't know where this thing is. He doesn't know what you could do to him, but he knows you could do anything you want because you are a squared away, confident man, an adult, a leader of a squared away family. So he just knows it. And that is, I think, a bigger flex than any firearm or yelling or whatever it could do. The other part of this, though, that I wanted to address is that there's a loss of innocence that comes with all this. We can't beat around the bush, and we have to be comfortable with that. I remember my mom committed suicide. Eventually, that story came up because my kids asked why I call my stepmom by her first name. And it's just a habit I had as a kid. I don't call her mom. I call her by her first name. And then I call my dad, Dad. And they asked me why. I was like, oh, damn. So I had to explain it. And I didn't want to, but I did. I broke it down. I was like, hey, so here's what happened. And then they went a little further. Well, how did she die? I was like, oh, my goodness. Okay, guys, let's go all in. And I explained it. And I'll never forget. My son asked, well, what's suicide? And I was like, oh, I didn't want him to know what that was. I didn't want that to ever be a word in his life. And he was young. Like, this is years ago. And I was like, shoot, I had a moment there to kind of go back and forth. And what do I do? And I just told him. I explained it, at sort of an age appropriate level. But at the bottom line, somebody taking their own life. That's what it is. And he understood that. And I could tell he felt like he had asked a bad thing. Like he's like, oh, shoot. I didn't know what that really meant. He thought it was like a disease or something, I think. And I was like, no, but it's okay. I was like, this is something that happens, and some people are going through some tough things. They don't see another way out. I was like, but fortunately we do. We found a way to handle things, and when things get heavy, I rely on the family and I'll talk to you guys. And when you guys, things get heavy for you, you talk to me. And I sort of spun it to a productive thing there. But a lot of parents are trying to hold that innocence on for so long. And that's not how it works. You have to let them grow. So I don't want it to come across as it's all sunshine and rainbows. We've addressed it several times. Like it is uncomfortable, and it's tough enough to go as far to say it sucks. Like sometimes it does really suck to have these talks. But again, we have to work ourselves out of a job. You worked yourself out of the gym, even though you really wanted them to come. So what would you do there? Would you neuter their growth? Would you go back and teach them less so you could have more time with them? Or would you do what you did and keep training them and pushing them and growing them to where they can go on their own? So let that be known. Like there is a brutal side for parents, but that's the reality. Throughout all the discussions and every video you see on this thing, you are working yourself out of a job. It's not that you're fired and they leave, but they just don't need you as much because they're learning their own. They're walking on their own. They're growing those legs and they're learning about things that you wish they didn't have to learn about. I wish reality wasn't what it was. It can be a brutal place out there. A lot of bad things happen to really good people. That's just the way it is, and that's the world we have to operate in. So that's the world we have to strengthen our children and prepare them for. So it's not a bad thing that you are introducing your kid to some things that you wish you didn't have to. It's just the way it is. That's just life. And, I know we don't like to say that to kids. It's just the way it is. I said so. But in this one, it is. That's reality. The reality is dark things happen, bad things happen, and your kids need to be prepared for that. And a part of that is preparing that mind before their body finds themselves in a space where it's happening to them.
I love it, brother. That is something that we definitely have to teach our kids, right? Life is filled of dark times, but there's also bright spots. And we don't let the dark times define us or keep us down. And if we avoid the dark times, if we don't talk about them, we're never going to be aware when they're there, right? We're not going to know that we need to push forward or we need to get better. But I loved how you said, right, you're getting yourself out of a job. I think that's great, right? It should be actually a goal of every parent, even though it doesn't feel the best. That's the ultimate goal, is we want our kids to be able to go out on their own and be independent. And in order for that to happen, there is some serious work that needs to be done 20 years prior, honestly. And that's something we overlook a lot with parenting, with fatherhood. We tend to get caught in these traditional roles where we just replicate what was done to us. And we never think about all the things that we had to push past or move past with no support. Think about how much better our kids are going to be because they had a little bit more support than we did, or maybe a lot more support. So I always looked at the future is going to be bright, right? I can't wait to see the next chapters and what my kids do and who they become and how their life continues to grow and expand. I don't have to be a part of every moment because I know I've done my job. So I think that's the beauty of it. And one more thing I will say, which is super important. If you know any fathers who are struggling, who have difficulty with their kids, who you hear them always complaining about things are tough and things are bad, reach out. Obviously share Oak and Rock Fatherhood with them, but let them know that it's okay to struggle. But what we want to do is move past those struggles. We want to find better ways. We want to open up the conversation, get more fathers involved. Me and Zac speak on Twitter every other Saturday, and the level that has grown, the level of conversation and how things have just opened up is amazing to see. And that's just one day, twice, one time every 2 weeks. So we're hoping that we bring this message out a few times a week to you men, to the fathers. That compound effect, how things will grow and how we can become better as fathers, as a community, all for the benefit of our kids, man. I think it's powerful.
No, it's absolutely powerful, and that's one of the things. So if you're looking to increase your power, grow your influence, and prepare your children, drop the comments below, shoot the DM, like Anthony was just saying. Shout out to Kala of @GreaterForever on Twitter if you want to follow him. He's the one who came up with the Founding Fathers Twitter Spaces that we're jumping on every other Saturday.
Future fathers.
Founding
fathers were cool though too.
That sounds cool though, right? Future fathers. Founding fathers is badass. I'm thinking about the Constitution here. But look, so at Future Fathers Twitter Spaces, it's just a good time of fathers coming together. It's incredible to see the output that's happening there and the men that are expanding their growth, connecting with each other. That's the point of this. To be the oak with deep roots, to be the rock, a strong, hard man, to become these things while being able to influence and grow a family peacefully. You have to weather that storm and take those heavy hits. And a part of that is doing the hard things And sometimes that hard thing is much more difficult than going out and fighting the bad guy. Sometimes it's having that talk with a young child in your home about something that's heavy. So if you don't know how to have that talk or when to have that talk, or you have a specific situation you want addressed, shoot the DM or drop a comment below. We'll bring that up on the next live Q&A we have on Wednesdays. But that's it for today's Oak and Rock Fatherhood episode. Stay strong, connect with your kids, and have those difficult conversations. It's absolutely necessary.